Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Dee again, and welcome to the Interstate with Dee. Today is Saturday, April 19th, 2025. Welcome back to our trip on the Interstate. What we do here is present news from the state level that will end up having national importance later, or news that made it into the national news cycle but was overshadowed. Then we go over some questions from y'all. On this date, April 19th, in 1775, British and colonial forces met in Lexington. It became known as the shot heard around the world. We're starting off with measles, which is up to 712 confirmed cases. Montana hasn't had a case of measles since 1990. Now it has 5. Okay, and on to the news. Alabama saw a completely unsurprising turn of events. A bill was introduced to require, quote, a prayer consistent with Judeo-Christian values in the morning at public schools. It has now been changed to include all religions, as required by the U.S. Constitution. If this follows other patterns, either the bill will be shot down, or it will pass and then not enforced when they realize students might pray to Lucifer or pasta. California is set to sue Trump over his plans to dismantle AmeriCorps. At Florida State University, reporting says the person behind the mass incident was a deputy's stepson. In Idaho, Trump's cuts at the USDA terminated a $59 million grant to the University of Idaho that would have helped farmers in the state. A senator from Maryland was able to meet with a man who was deported to El Salvador in error, who has become the center of a contentious legal battle. In Massachusetts, Harvard University has become the front line in Trump's attempt to influence higher education in the United States. In Montana, Bernie Sanders and AOC drew a crowd of thousands. Nevada's assembly passed a bill to end daylight savings time. The bill there heads to the Senate, and there's a nationwide push to end the changing of the clocks. In North Carolina, Trump denied additional FEMA funds to areas that voted heavily for him. In Ohio, a judge blocked a social media age verification law. Oklahoma City is remembering the events of 30 years ago when the federal building was attacked. 168 were lost. In Pennsylvania, a lab that certifies N95 masks and respirators may end up closing due to federal cuts. Virginia's state flag was banned in at least one Texas school district. If you've never seen the state's flag, go ahead and pull up an image. It shows a woman standing on a deceased king. But the implied violence wasn't the issue. It was the exposed cartoon breasts of the woman that caused the problem. The woman symbolizes virtue, which just makes the whole thing funnier. Washington State Supreme Court overturned a regulation targeting homeless people that made it illegal to camp in most of Spokane. And here's your weird state fact for this week. In 1775, when the colonials met with the British forces, they didn't intend to fight the British and were basically hoping to scare them off or at least let them know they were around. But somebody fired. Who? Well, there's no real consensus. The British say it was the colonials say it was the British. Some records indicate it was a spectator. Nobody really knows who fired the shot heard around the world. Okay, so moving on to the question and answer portion of the show. Question number 1. I'm not the most legally fluent person and saw this on Reddit. Can you please explain this? Then there's a screenshot of people talking about the Supreme Court taking up a part of Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship. I know Bell has a video coming out on this, but basically the part that the Supreme Court agreed to take up doesn't really have to do with birthright citizenship. It's really about whether district judges can issue a nationwide injunction. If the Supreme Court says they can't, it'll create a situation where people born in one state will have different citizenship status than somebody born to the exact same circumstances in another state. It would be a giant mess and would also encourage people to simply change districts. The next one isn't really a question. It says, "Howdy team. I've got an update on the unemployment insurance benefits for striking workers in Washington state. SB 5041 has passed both chambers and is headed for the governor's desk. We can't say for sure if Bob Ferguson will sign. He seems to be trying to distinguish himself from our previous governor, Jay Inslee. If he appeals to the center by being anti-labor, then he will find himself on the list of candidates to be primaried. We can't afford to lose any labor rights at the state level, given the federal conditions." I mean, that pretty well provides both the news and commentary on that one. Okay, that looks like it. We'll see you next week for another trip. Y'all have a good day.